Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkington, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the Derate the Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. Friends, today we are diving deep into the flavorful world of emotions with our incredible guest, Kim Korte. If you've ever wondered how to navigate your reactions and interactions with others more effectively, you're in for a treat. Kim and I will be exploring the fascinating idea that our emotions are like flavors. Think yucky, yummy, savory, and sweet. By understanding and distinguishing these emotional flavors, we can gain more control over our responses and make our interactions smoother and more meaningful. We'll also challenge some preconceived notions and talk about the importance of keeping an open mind. Personal growth is all about embracing new experiences and perspectives, and Kim's insights from her book, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Our Emotions, are to inspire you. So get ready, my friends, to discover the power of emotional awareness and learn how recognizing and managing your emotions can lead to positive change and better relationships. Stay tuned because this conversation is packed with insights that you definitely do not want to miss. And with that, here we go. Kim Korte, thank you for joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast. I am very grateful to have you here today.
And I'm equally as grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kim. When you reached out and I saw that you've written this book and you talk a lot about emotions, it right away it triggered something in me because one of the things that I talk about. I mean, everybody knows the Derate the Hate podcast tagline, mission statement, whatever you want to call it, is bettering the world one attitude at a time. And our attitude is largely based on our emotions or how we control our emotions. And well, at least in my opinion. And so when I started working towards that tagline, that mission statement, one of the things that I continued to tell myself, and I continue to tell myself till, this day, is never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. And I know that is probably one of the hardest things that we as human beings do. But for me, that was something that I had to master. So when I saw that you had written this book, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Our Emotions, I'm like, I definitely want to talk to Kim Korte. So Kim, let's just get right into it. Tell me about, I know you talked about these life quakes, these monumental life things that happened to you that led to your desire to figure out emotions and emotional awareness. Start there for me. Talk about where the genesis of this book was and what led you to where you are now.
We all have a story. We all have backgrounds that shape us. I had some things that happened to me when I was a young girl, should not have happened. I was raised with a very loving but very alcoholic mother who died of it when I was 30. And around the time that she died, I met my now ex-husband, and I thought, well, there were some other things in life, but I'm not going to get into all those, right? But
No worries.
it was after I was divorcing my husband that I had met not too long after my mom died. And I thought he was, he was it and the love of my life, and we were going to be together forever. And he cheated on me, left me for someone who worked for us. We had two businesses, and I was trying to pick up the pieces of my life. I had taken a position. I was living in San Diego, and I took a position up in San Francisco. I was packing up everything I had left from my condo to take it to San Francisco. And I just laid down on the floor. Like, I just couldn't take it. And from the sunlight was on when I got down on the floor, and it was dark when I got up. And it was just this review and like, how does this happen? And where did I go wrong? And what was going on? And how can I keep this from happening to me again? And it reminded me when you said, oh, we control our emotions. And that's what I was trying to do. But that's like trying to control the ocean. That's trying to control the sea. There's so much that we don't have access to control the ocean. So why not learn how to ride it better? And that's what started my quest. And I got into thought management. I'm just going to manage my thoughts, and that's going to make the big change. But it wasn't enough. And it was when I read this book called How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain. My mind was blown because I understood this. Well, the author is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she talks about this theory she created of constructed emotions, and that we construct our emotions using our history, our past, to construct it. But what we use to construct it is sensory signals. And that was like incredible to me because, well, then that's the ingredients of our emotions. And I kind of went from there and developed the book.
Well, it's fascinating. So the path that you took with this, and I think it's really neat. I was looking through your website and kind of trying to figure out how the title related to emotions, right? A lot of people are looking at this and they're like, "Is it a book about desserts? What's going on here?" Right? Um, but the idea that there are flavors of our emotions, and our emotions are these complex things, just like a recipe, right? There's a lot of things that go into them, and I can only imagine. I mean, full disclosure, I haven't read the book yet, but it's one of these things when I think of that, and I think about the importance of that. I think about all the different things that do go into our emotions, and how if we try to, compartmentalize the different things, we can probably, just like we control how we're making a fine dish, right? Is we can control the flavors, we can control whether it's savory, whether it's sweet, we can control how it's going to hit the palate, and how this is going to affect us, throughout whatever the experience happens to be. Is that kind of where you were going with this?
Well, a little bit. So what is flavor? Flavor is different from taste. Taste is a sensory system. We've got taste buds. What is it? Bitter, sour, sweet, umami, and salt. And that's how we capture those components of food or drink. But really, flavor is a combination of multiple senses. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, or what we smell, these are all included. And that's how emotions are. And there's various components of flavors, just like there's various components of emotions. So it was a nice and easy fit because we can relate to eating something bitter and how it feels in our body, just like sadness can be bitter, or love feels very savory, just like maybe a bite of a delicious steak. And, kindness is sweet. You're getting where I'm going here. We have this relationship with food that is emotional. And so when we can connect to our emotions, like we can connect to the flavors in a dish, that gives us a greater ability to recognize our emotions. And I'm just going to give you an example, a really easy example. If you were to buy 3 tubs of vanilla ice cream from 3 different producers
Mm-hmm.
and take a bite of each. One, if you examined it, you might say, oh, this is really creamy and not too sweet, just very dense in flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Took a bite of the middle one and you're like, it's fairly sweet, but it's not as dense a flavor. It's a little bit more watery, you might say, or icy or whatever. And then
Sure.
the last one might have a lot of vanilla in it. They are all ice cream. They're all vanilla ice cream, and each one is distinct. And so when we can identify our emotions with that kind of distinction, this gives us a greater ability to identify them and also to lean into what we like, what we don't like, what we want more of, what we want less of in our emotional experiences. And we can distinguish between the vanilla ice creams in our lives, if that makes any sense. And the way that we do this is when we connect to a sensory system that I haven't talked about, that a lot of people don't even think about having, but it's very prominent in our life. It's called interoception. And it's a big word. And if you write it out and you spell check it, it's going to say interception. So I say it's how we catch our emotions. It's the interior emotions or feelings that we have, and we experience them all the time. So
Sure.
emotions come in 2 flavors. We have the kind that we're hungry. Our brain tells us we're hungry, and we have gurgles in our stomach. Our stomach's doing activity all day long we're not aware of, but we only pay attention when the brain tells us to. And the
Mm-hmm.
same
Mm-hmm.
with with your heartbeat and all these other things. So the same can happen with our emotions. And when we can connect to those feelings with that same distinction that we can learn to detect with food, we're going to be able to identify them that much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the real important thing that I'm getting and I'm taking away from that is, well, that emotional awareness thing, right? How do we
Mhm.
become aware of the different things that are happening? Obviously, and this is another thing that I talk so much about, is there's so much that happens outside of our control, but how we react to it really makes the difference, right? Well, how we react to it is often as a result of our emotions. Our emotions are affected by all of these different outside influences, and it's not until that emotional thing, talk about your stomach. You talk about your stomach, and you don't even notice that it's doing anything until it starts to act differently than what it would normally do. Same thing I'm seeing, or same thing I recognized within myself, years and years ago is, there's obviously emotional triggers. There's different things going on. I'm being affected differently by different things that are outside of me. And then it wasn't until all of a sudden it's just like all of a sudden this internal gut punch, and then I've got to try and figure out what it is that's going on and how do I deal with that. That's how I came up with my mantra of never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. I don't want people to be confused. I don't believe that means I have to be emotionless and
Right.
I completely ignore my emotions. But what I do is I try to, I think about, Kim, when you talk about, laying on the floor and trying to figure out, why am I laying here? What am I doing? How do I overcome this? You know, I've had those same kind of feelings, but I learned a long time ago that I didn't want to be that person that laid there on the floor feeling powerless over what happened, or laying there feeling powerless over how I was reacting to what happened. What I did want to be is somebody who uh, looked at that and says, looked at that from a logical perspective. And we can talk a little bit about logic, because I know that you talk about the difference between logic and emotion, right?
Mhm.
How I could physically, or not physically, but mentally, work that switch of how do I how do I take back control over, not necessarily what I'm feeling, because like my dad always used to say, you can control what you think, but you can't control what you feel. And then if you can learn to think through what it is before you allow your emotions to trigger those reactions, which is where I kind of came up with my never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. If you can start to take control of that switch, you're going to come out the other side better. I don't know if that actually made things better, but what are your thoughts on that? Because it sounds like, we're talking about the same things a little bit, but there's definitely a difference there. So tell me what your thoughts are on that, Kim.
Yeah, and I just wanna go back to how I was before that person laying on the floor who pushed down a lot of emotions, who didn't face a lot of the feelings, and learned that throughout my life to ignore the unpleasant and, call it willful blindness, call it whatever you want. It was learned. So I had a harder time connecting to how I felt to
Mhm.
figure it out because I wasn't completely connected, and you sound a little bit more connected to your body. But, I just wanna I think that we're talking a lot of this in the same way. When I talk about these ingredients, well, you have to have a recipe to use them, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so where do we get our recipes? It's our past experiences. Whether we're aware of them or not, that's what we're using to cook up our emotions. Our brain is a prediction machine. Everything we see is a prediction. Everything we hear is a prediction. We don't see with our eyes, we see with our brain.
Right.
And be right? So
Mhm. Yeah, I know
for
that's
that,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and our feelings also are because of our brain. And so the brain, it takes in like a Top Chef contestant on the Food Network channel who gets a basket of surprise ingredients and has to figure out what to do with it. They're going to lean on their experience. And that's what your brain does. It gets these ingredients that it uses to tell us what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what's going on, but it also uses it to tell us what we feel. And it's going back to these prior ingredients. That's why um, we we sometimes, react and we're like, "I don't even know why I reacted that way." So the idea is if we can get better at distinguishing, identifying the quote unquote ingredients and being able to distinguish them, we can tend to lump things together. Going back to that vanilla ice cream, we kind of call everything vanilla ice cream sometimes, or we just want a bagel. And when we can have that distinction, like I when mentioned earlier, of the feeling different in different situations, or recognizing that this is not the same vanilla ice cream I had before, this is different, and so that we can recognize it and then pivot from it potentially
Mhm.
easier. So it's really about recognizing the taste and developing our interoceptive awareness so that we can stop, or at least know enough to say, "Hey, I'm reacting to this and maybe I shouldn't," and look at what's going on and create a new recipe on the fly. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I think it does. I mean, I think any, whether we call it emotional awareness or emotional intelligence or just, I talk a lot about personal accountability, personal responsibility, how we react to things, right? And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, Kim. Here is as we perceive different things that are going on in our life, we're going to look back to the familiarities from our past and try to uh, latch on and just in our human nature, our human brain, we're going to try and latch onto those same things and probably go with what's familiar and react in a similar way. But if we start to recognize that just because this is similar, it's not the same, and just because that caused pain doesn't mean this is going to cause pain. Is that what I'm hearing from you? Because that's what I think I'm hearing from you.
No, it is. It's that ability to so if you give your brain more detail, you're
Hmm.
gonna have a more detail in your memories, right?
Right,
So
right.
if and this is what we're talking about doing ultimately. We're talking about being proactive in creating our memories because
Hmm.
our brain uses a lot of our memories for our thoughts, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And essentially it does for also for emotions, but our memories are comprised of what was going on at the time and how we felt about it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when we give our brain more detailed memories, then it's going to have more to fall on, right?
Yeah.
It's like learning the difference between colors. If every red was red and we didn't know the difference between all the different shades and what they're named. And so it's honestly, this is really about two things. Adding distinction to, like I said, being able to see situations disparately, like this is not exactly the
Hmm.
same, instead of just lumping every person, every
Hmm.
political party, every colored skin, every country, every county, all these
Yep.
things that we lump together, and to be able to step back and say, "No, this doesn't have to be the same.
No, that's right.
This person has its own recipe, or give it its own recipe because we're giving more detail."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and then the other thing that is what I try and provide people with my book is the idea that we have a chef in our head
Hmm.
and that it's the chef who's cooking it up. It's not us, it's our chef, but the chef works for us. It's
Hmm.
like in our house, we have two dogs, but Finnegan is the oldest. And we use Finnegan all the time. We'll say, "Oh, Finnegan didn't pick up the trail of stuff that he left, and my husband's talking to me." And I know it, but because it's a third party, it doesn't bother me so much. And
Right.
then when the toilet paper roll doesn't get changed when it's empty, I can say, "Finnegan didn't change it." So you see what I'm saying here. It's a great way um, to allow us to work with our emotions because we're working with our chef.
Right. No, and that's so fantastic, Kim, that you were talking about it in that way, because that's exactly where my brain started going. When you start to think about, when we talk about familiarity and how we perceive things and how we react to things based on our own perception. I mean, I go back to something I talk about quite often is, what? Oftentimes the problem is not the problem, but how we react to the problem it is the problem, and how we react to the problem is based on our perception and the things that we think about that are relational or similar to that from our past. What you're talking about, in my opinion, or what I'm catching here again, is taking a proactive stance and saying, just because this is this way doesn't mean it's the same situation that I was in before, or just because this person is similar to that other person that I was talking to doesn't mean it's the same person. So I don't have to have the same reaction. I don't have to prejudge. I don't have to come up with this preconceived notion of who this person is or who that group is or how this works. And this means so much to me, just this thought process and this, whether you want to call it, like, again, emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, the way that we interact with people doesn't have to be the same just because we perceive them to be same or similar to somebody else that we knew. It's just, it goes back to the thing that we were talking about in our pre-show conversation, Kim, about the work that I do with the organization Braver Angels. Oftentimes people have these preconceived notions of who this person is because of whether it be the political party that they affiliate with, or the, again, the color, like you mentioned, the color of their skin, or where they come from, or are they from the city, or are they from the country, or whatever this thing is. But if you start to realize that every different person has their own nuances. Every situation has its different nuances. We do not have to react the same way. Going back to my point, it's often the problem isn't the problem. The way we react to the problem is the problem. Just because it's a similar situation doesn't mean we automatically have to perceive that as the same situation. So we can custom build our reaction to it and not necessarily just default back to the person laying on the floor, a puddle in the fetal position.
Exactly. What you're talking about is so important because we can't really have conversations, can we, when we have expectations and when our brain is predicting, which it does all the time. I mean, like everything, you are a prediction, right, of my brain right now looking at you. And when we understand that our brain can predict things incorrectly and that it's up to us to be like the chef who took one taste of the food and said, I think this is this, and then takes a second sip and goes, oh. In fact, that's why I start the whole book out. The very first chapter is called Opus 1 to Buck Chuck and the Wine Snob. And it's a true story of a man who walked into a party, took a taste of Opus 1 wine that he poured from a bottle, and took a sip and said, oh, I love this wine. Now, Opus 1 is this very fancy schmancy wine brand out of Napa, California, and, the wine country. And we all started laughing at him because before he had gotten there, the host took that empty bottle because the guy showed up late and filled it with a cheap Trader Joe's brand. But he tasted it and it tasted like Opus 1 because he expected it. And so when we understand that we get what we expect, that our brain will provide us what we're expecting, that in itself is extremely powerful.
Oh, no.
We get what we expect. And so if we can learn to take a second sip like this guy did and said, this isn't Opus 1, then we can, we're going to be a little bit more careful the next time we're at a party and we take a sip of wine. We might be like a sommelier and smell it and taste it, be a little bit more conscious. And I think this is really what we're talking about here, both you and I, is being more conscious in our situations.
More conscious in our situations, Kim. Take that second sip. Take a second look at what you're getting involved in, the conversation that you're having. Don't automatically prejudge and just think that because this person fits some stereotype or whatever that you think, you know what, take a second look, listen a little bit closer, listen a little bit deeper, try to have a little bit more open-mindedness in that conversation, because if you do that, your mind will not stand in the way nearly as much as it probably would have in your ability or inhibiting your ability to really absorb who that person is or what that situation has to offer. One of the things, going back to the emotion thing, Kim, one of the things that I always talk about in my coaching sessions and in the work that I do and with the people that that report to me or depend on me is every mistake is an opportunity for learning. I write that on the front of notebooks. I do. Every mistake is an opportunity for learning. But what happens is people often make a mistake and they will beat themselves up for it. And as soon as they start beating themselves up for it, they lose sight of the opportunity for learning. They start to beat themselves up, probably because somebody from their past used to beat them up for their mistakes instead of trying to help them to use that as an opportunity for learning. They start to beat themselves up, and that's where that emotional thing takes over. And if a person can actually step outside of themselves for a second, take that mistake that they just made, and instead of beating themselves up, going back to the thing you were talking about before. It's familiar. It's familiar because every time as a child you made a mistake, somebody beat you up for it. Instead, if you can just step outside of yourself and objectively look at the situation for a minute and say, if I would have done this, this, and this differently, so I'm going to change up the recipe. I'm going to do this, this, and this differently next time. And then this mistake, this thing, the result will be different. The flavor of this dish is going to be different next time because I'm going to take advantage of and learn from what just happened instead of going back to what was familiar and laying on the floor in a puddle.
Yes. How about thanking yourself for figuring out how not to do it, allowing you the opportunity to find out how to do it?
That's right. That's right. Kim Korte,
Gratitude.
this is pretty good. I've gotten a lot out of this. How about you?
I have
Oh.
too.
No, I'm really enjoying this conversation. It took me, like I said, full disclosure, I have not read the book, and I was trying to get my mind around it based on the notes on your website, kimkorte.com. And now it just means so much more to me, this concept and how we can change the recipe, how we don't have to just go back to what we believed before, or go to our preconceived notions of what this is going to be, because everything can have its own nuances. Everything can be a little bit different. We can change the
Yes.
recipe. We can do better things to be more emotionally aware. Again, I tell people, this is what worked for me, but it's not necessarily what worked for you. I always say, don't allow your emotions to dictate your actions, but that does not mean squash your emotions. That doesn't mean become an emotionless slug that just does not feel. It just means do a little bit more thinking and try to change the recipe.
You know, I just, that whole idea of not feeling is a funny one because we're born to feel.
Oh,
Feeling
absolutely.
is
Yeah.
probably the most important thing. Love is the most important thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, what happens when you find people who say, "Oh, I don't feel"? Oh, they do. They have outrage and anger, and they let everything out in just one big volcanic eruption. And it's like, yeah, you do feel. It's like a stomach that's asking for food.
Hmm.
Eventually, the brain's not gonna stop telling us, "This is the feeling, this is the feeling." And it's funny how once you let it out, it just kinda dissipates if you allow it, unless you wanna keep, chewing the cud like a cow.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's not the
if
way to
you let
do it.
it out and let it go, then your brain is happy.
That's right. That's right. Well, Kim, we've reached the end of our time here today together, and I tell you what, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Tell the DTH listeners where they can find out more about you, where they can find out more about your book. Yeah, Yucky, Yummy, Savory, Sweet, Understanding the Flavor of Emotions. What do you got for parting words for our listeners? And where can they find out more about you?
They can find out more about me at kimkorte.com, and the book is available on Amazon. And parting words are from a former emotion pusher downer. It doesn't work. And that when you get your emotions to work for you, they're just not as scary. In fact, I'm not afraid of my emotions at all anymore.
Nice. Very nice. Kim Korte, thank you so much for joining me on the D-Rate the 8 podcast. I do appreciate your time, and I look forward to more conversations in the future. Stay well.
Me as well. Thank you. You too.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the D-Rate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.